Okay, World of Blazers, thank you for coming back to another episode. I have an amazing guest. I'm very glad you took the time to be here. This is Carlos Frey. Is that correct? Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was hoping I did. I don't want to botch that. Sorry. But yeah, you're a 6-time Emmy Award winning journalist. You come with a lot of clout, investigative journalist as well. You do documentaries. You have a podcast, The Raid. And I was interested to talk to you. At first, I think your representatives thought I might have been a little too like MAGA or whatever. But if anybody's watched my shows, most of my people know I talk to everybody. I want to get all sides. I want to hear everyone's stories because the thing I see lacking most these days is people don't talk to each other. And so I want to hear what you have to say on everything that's happening based on your work. You spent a lot of time investigating the border, investigating what migrants go through, and you have firsthand experience, I believe, from your mother. Is that correct?
Yeah, I witnessed my mother get deported in front of me, and she was here in the country legally. She had a green card. She was a legal U.S. resident and didn't have her paperwork on her at the time. I mean, this is years ago. We see that happening now quite a bit with the immigration raids, but back then when I was a kid, she didn't have her passport with her. She didn't have her documents with her. She didn't have the proper paperwork that would have let a border patrol agent know that she was in the country legally, and she was handcuffed, put in the back of a patrol car, and taken across the border back to Mexico, even though she had 4 U.S. citizen children, a U.S. citizen husband, and had been in the country legally for 20 years. So that has happened to me as a kid.
Was that part of your motivation and going down this road? Like all those years, did you hold on to that, and that always in the back of your mind motivates you to look into these issues when it relating to the border and whatnot?
If I'm going to be honest with you, George, I would say yes and no, because when I was a kid, I did not want to be Mexican. I did not want to be of Mexican descent. My last name is Frey, Frey. My first name is John, and I went by John Frey. I dropped the Carlos. I wanted to be white. I wanted to fit in with the kids that I went to school with. I saw Mexican kids being discriminated against, being laughed at, being ridiculed, and I tried to pass. So for a long time, I did not claim Latino heritage at all. When I grew up, became an adult, and became a man, that all changed. So I would say yes, that what happened to my mother certainly informed me as a journalist. But also, I grew up within eye shot of the U.S.-Mexico border. The cat and mouse game of border patrol agents chasing migrants that were crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally in the cover of darkness, running through shrubs, people's backyards, chased by border patrol agents, helicopters. That whole cat and mouse game was a part of my upbringing. I even remember as a boy playing Army with the border patrol helicopter, pretending to be a migrant, throwing up dust in an open field, trying to catch the border patrol helicopter spotlight. So I didn't know that not all the kids were growing up this way. I thought this was a normal way to grow up. So this idea of migration and arresting and all of that is just in my blood.
Understood. So let's talk about your work because you've been investigating this topic, these things, and actually talking to migrants themselves for over 20 years?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So I want to talk about your findings because I think we live in a world of basically everything is so hyper, so max, right? In terms of the media, and we're only hearing half the story half the time, well, maybe a quarter of the time. And there's always a lot left out. There's a lot of bias, for example, right? So you don't get to hear the whole story. I use certain outlets that will give you like the left, center, and right, so I can get all sides. But most people never hear that. So what I'm hoping in this conversation is that you're able to, at least for my audience or anybody else who will listen to this, is expose people to basically just hearing things that's outside of the damn bubble that they create for themselves. Like too many people live in an echo chamber, and that's I think what's keeping us where we are right now in America. So hopefully can shed light on these things. So your work in which you did investigating the border, like what did you find? Because from what I've heard from some of your interviews, by the way, I know you've mentioned how the Border Patrol themselves, they're kind of unruly at times, or they seem like, I heard your story about how there were shooting across the border, right, at actual Mexicans in Mexico. And, you have other stories that you've told where it's just like, people getting ripped out of their cars, et cetera. And so it's like, can you elaborate on that and just let people know what does happen? Because there is a human side to this, and I'm always trying to figure out, well, how do we enforce our border policies, enforce the law and our sovereignty, but at the same time see the humanity in people themselves and not just treat them as, just garbage or people that we can just throw away and toss to the side.
Yeah, it's a really complex question. I'm glad you asked it, but I mean, I want to go through like 25 parts of it because it's
Sure.
not just one size fits all. And I'm not going to do that to your listeners. I'm not going to bore them with you. But I am a firm believer in border security. I'm a believer that there is a need for people to come across with some form of documentation so that we know who's coming to come through possibly a port of entry where you have to show your ID before you get into the United States, that you legally have the right to be here. But by the same token, we allow people to come by large numbers without proper documentation. There is a large pull in the United States for people who are south of the border to work in our fields, to work in our restaurants, to work in construction sites. And we all kind of pretend that it doesn't happen. As long as you can get across that maze, get over the fence, under the fence, where there isn't a fence, as long as you can go through that maze, we'll get you a job. We'll make sure that you work in our fields for $6, $7 an hour. So there's this whole kind of underground economy that pretends we all love border security, but at the same time, we would really love somebody without papers to come pick our vegetables and not pay you anything and not give you any rights. So there's that part of it. In addition to that, there's the US Border Patrol who manages the US Mexico border. It used to be, before Trump 2.0, that Border Patrol only patrolled the border. They were only had a jurisdiction 70 miles north of the physical borderline itself. We can get into the reasons why that's not happening today and why we see them in Minneapolis. But for the most part, it was a force that is paramilitary. This is their own description. They are trained as military personnel. They have a rank structure just like US military. They are armed like US military. There are Black Hawk helicopters that fly along the US Mexico border. There are drones. There are night vision capability. There are sensors all over the place. So it's kind of like a war zone along the US Mexico border, and that has amplified since 9/11, and understandably so. The Border Patrol posture changed after 9/11 to become more of an anti terrorism group. So they're trained to see migrant, brown skin, Spanish speaking, foreign language speaking person as the threat, as the enemy. And they will shoot first and ask questions later. That is their footing, that is their training, that is how they operate. They want to pose a viable threat, mostly to deter people from coming. If a migrant comes up to the border and sees Humvees and helicopters and armed to the teeth agents, maybe they're going to think twice about coming. So that's more of a deterrent strategy that we have there. But by the same token, people get injured. People get injured a lot. Most Border Patrol agents on patrol are by themselves. They do not have a buddy alongside them. They are patrolling the border, usually in a 20, 30-mile stretch on their own. So if they happen to fire their weapon, if they happen to kill somebody, God forbid, it's not investigated for the most part. There have been numerous shootings, killings, sometimes, as you mentioned, firing their weapons across the border into Mexico, sometimes hitting people, killing people. To date, the U.S. Border Patrol itself is about 100 years old in its establishment. There's not been one agent who's ever been arrested and convicted of firing their weapon in a negative, bad way, or killing somebody by accident or murdering somebody. It's never happened. So every time they fire their weapon, it's been supported by the U.S. Border Patrol itself. They investigate themselves and they adjudicate their own shootings, very much like what happened to Renee Good and what happened to Alex Preddy. There isn't an investigation, at least from the Department of Homeland Security, into whether or not that was a viable shoot, whether or not they should have fired their weapons. That's not even being investigated. And that happens along the border all the time. I could go on for your entire podcast, but I'll stop there.
I mean, you can take us wherever you like, John, because I'm open to discussion, and of course, I'll have some data as well. But and whatever I say is not just to oppose you. By the way, it's just to have the conversation. So I just hope that I'm just going to set that precedent. And I agree with you. What happened with the whole thing in Minnesota? Like we're talking about Renee Good, we're talking about Alex Preddy. So first off, Renee Good, everyone can see that a certain way depending on how you saw the angle of the cameras. Regardless, should she have been killed? No, I don't think so. But we can't ignore that the vehicle can be seen as a weapon. But at the same time, none of us were in that guy's shoes. We have no idea the reaction time, everything that he had to go through. Alex Preddy, that was an entirely different story. That there was no explaining away. There was no explaining away. They shot him, and they even asked where the gun was. There was a video out where they were asking, "Well, where the hell's the gun at?" Because the other agent already took it, walked off with it. The communication wasn't there. There was a huge breakdown in how they even handled that situation. It was just bad training all the way around. And
those were Border Patrol agents. Those were not ICE agents. Those were Border Patrol. Those were the paramilitary that fire their weapons first. My beef with the whole thing, I wasn't there. I don't know what video angles that everybody is seeing. True. There isn't an investigation. It's a closed case.
Agree. I agree with you. And honestly, I've said this, and I think it was crazy how they had Bovino step down, put Holman in, but then Kristi Noem just got away with, her initial statement was automatically defending her people instead of saying we're going to do an investigation and, we're not going to say anything until that's over. Like basically, we'll figure out what to do. They should have suspended everybody, put them under investigation, then move from there. But they didn't. And I'm surprised she's still where she is. I thought she should have been demoted or removed. That's my opinion, but that's the way I see it. So yeah, I agree with you. It's sad. It is very sad how things are handled. So let's talk about the feeling anyway that Border Patrol. Okay, so with everything that you've investigated, is it necessarily the view that it is Border Patrol specifically targeting brown people, or is it the sentiment that the people in the U.S. in general are just targeting brown people?
I think it might be a little bit of both. Well, who do you go after? Let's say right now there's a quota to grab as many undocumented people in the United States and deport them. I think there is a quota. I think they have a number and a target that they want to reach. I'm probably, if I'm a U.S. Border Patrol agent, I'm probably going to want to grab brown people who speak Spanish who work at a car wash. Chances are pretty good that those people might not be in the country legally. So I'm going to do a dragnet. I'm just going to scoop people up, and then I'll go ahead and select them out later and see which ones are here legally and which ones are not. So that is the targeting that's happening. They're going to Home Depots where people, day laborers, hang out. They're going to car washes. They're going to neighborhoods for the most part. There was a study done in LA County, which is where I live, where 70% of the neighborhoods that were hit by ICE during the immigration raids that were happening in LA were brown. We're brown communities. We're Spanish-speaking communities. That kind of makes sense. The Supreme Court has given them a little bit of cover. They're doing their job. It's the same thing at the border. If I'm in and around near a border fence, right at the borderline of the U.S.-Mexico border, and the Border Patrol agent hears me speaking English, I'm not going to be bothered. I'm just not going to be targeted. They're going to let people who are speaking English, who look American, who look white, they're going to let them go by a checkpoint. There are checkpoints all along the border when you're driving on the roads near the border to make sure you're not harboring anybody or carrying any contraband. The brown-speaking people with the Mexican license plates, even though they might be in the U.S. legally, are probably going to be targeted. That is part of their protocol. That is part of their training. Kristi Noem said that. That is part of their training, to single out people they suspect are in the country illegally. I would choose a brown person.
It's logical.
It's logical, but that is also, when it comes to police work, it's also racial profiling, because there are a lot of people who've been wrapped up who are here legally. So just because I have brown skin doesn't necessarily mean that I'm in the country illegally.
No, you're right.
You have that problem as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I have friends that are all Mexican. You don't know my background. I was the minority white guy in Mexican neighborhoods, to be honest. I was the guy that was always jumped and beaten and everything else. So I was always called, the asshole white kid, the gringo, wedo, all that shit. So I grew up like that. I was the one getting jumped by the gangs. And so that was my background. That's how I grew up. But my friends are Mexican. I know a lot of people from Mexico. One of my very good friends, he's still trying to get his wife over here. He went through the system, did everything the right way. His uncle brought him over. He has a computer science degree, has a great job. His wife's still in Mexico. He's going through the process trying to get her over here legally. I think they fast-tracked it. Hopefully she'll be here soon. So I've seen those sides. I've heard the stories also from people who are from Mexico and have families that have immigrated here. My father, all my father's side, they're Portuguese. They all came here from the Azores. So it's like, I I have a little bit of an idea. I'm not necessarily a brown, so I guess I'm not targeted every day. But I went through my side of things, and I think it's important for me to say that because a lot of people will think that, well, you can just throw a blanket out there and make a statement and say, white people hate brown people and we're targeting brown people and all of that, and that's not really the case. And everybody that I know in my circle, honestly, even conservatives, to be honest, we don't hate immigrants. We just want them to come through the right way. But I know you probably have something to say about that. But let me circle
No,
circle
good. I
back.
like
Let me go ahead and touch on something that I heard you say on an interview, and it kind of parallels to what I'm talking about. How it's kind of lost my train of thought slightly there, but it's basically parallels to what I was just saying about how people are being targeted for their skin color, right? I think it's wrong that we see someone who's from Mexico, for example, and just automatically think they're just taking advantage of the system. They're dirty and they're lazy. When that's never my experience. My experiences are tough, hardworking. I mean, there's something in the DNA because I'll tell you what, they're definitely tough as they can be, and they definitely put the work in to try to succeed and survive. And the older generations, from what I deal with, is they're always trying to make sure that their sons and their daughters don't have to go through what they went through. So they're trying to make them, come up, get educated, and move on and make a good life for themselves. But again, where I'm going with this is, I think that the targeting is there because the percentages is what is it about over 40%? Actually, I think I pulled it up. If you don't mind me saying, yeah, between 30 to 40% of immigrants come from Mexico. So
it's the largest source. You're right.
yeah, so it's easy to target brown people, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not making an excuse. I'm just saying it's like just by that
Oh,
number.
I get it.
Yeah.
If I were a Border Patrol agent, I would probably do the same thing because it's my training. That's what
Yeah.
I'm told to do.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
told to suspect the Spanish speaker. I am taught to suspect people in particular jobs, dishwashers at a restaurant, construction workers. I saw a video clip the other day of a Border Patrol agent jumping on a roof to get a brown Spanish speaking guy who was doing some roofing work. And the guy's jumping from roof to roof on the houses and he nabbed him, but he wasn't going for the guys that were on the ground that didn't look like the guy that was on the
True.
roof.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
part of their training. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what they get in the academy. This is how they are trained. This is specifically what they are doing. And it does look when there's a difference, I suspect, and maybe this has brought it all out into the open, and your point is very well taken. Police work in the interior, your city cop is not trained this way. And he would probably be fired if he only went after brown people and arrested them and considered them to be criminal first. We have this idea in our country that you're innocent until proven guilty, that you're not supposed to be racially profiled and be arrested just because of the color of your skin. No American would ever stand for that. But that's what's happening when you bring Border Patrol agents who are trained that way. And they're trained that way because they have a different militaristic footing. They have a paramilitary footing. They're going to look at enemy. They're going to look at suspects first. They're not considering these individuals to be innocent. That's why they're breaking in car windows. That's why they're dragging people out of their cars. This is part of their training. This is their academy training. This is how they're trained along the border because they have the idea that there's a threat of terrorism at the border. So everybody is suspected that way.
Okay. So to that point, and I knew we were going to get there eventually. I've already interviewed DEA agents, FBI agents. I even have 2 people that are in the intel community that I still stay in touch with. And I'll tell you what, there is a real threat of terrorism against the United States of America. And just in 2025, there was over 4,000 terrorist encounters at our borders. That's enough to put over 80 terrorists in every single state of the United States of America. That is a terrorist cell in every state. Okay, so far, I think it's less than that. I think it's 3,000 something thus far. Let me look. Yep, in 2026, so far, just 2026, we're not even at the end of the year, they've already encountered 3,927 terrorists. And it doesn't matter what skin color they are. These are just actual terrorists that were caught. That doesn't account for gotaways or what they call getaways, which I know you know what I'm talking about. So
Sure.
If we take that data, I mean, we can't say that there is not a threat. There is a threat. And maybe what's happening, and I'm not taking away from anything you said, because I also agree with you. I think the way they're going about enforcing policies is not the correct way to do it. I mean, it's pretty obvious if someone has a job and they've been here 15, 20 years, And there's always an argument saying, yes, they were here illegal. But I think at some point it's like, look, let's reel this back. Let's start over. Let's give you this chance. And there's a difference between those people and people who actually have a criminal record. And I've always said that. And most people I know have this, they feel the same way because it's not right. You've been here 20 years, you have a family, but you've never done anything, wrong. Let's give those guys, let's reset it. Let's go, okay, here we are. Let's talk about it and let's give you a chance to get everything going and let's make this legal. Let's make you a citizen or whatever we got to do. I think they should give them those chances, not just suddenly go, okay, you're out. And I don't think that's right. That's just my opinion. But if we're going back to the data here, I mean, how do we then balance enforcing the real threat to the United States and enforcing our border and still being empathetic and sympathetic to people who are looking for a better life?
It's not an easy task. I think there are two parts to this. I'm in full agreement with you that there is a threat. I have never said in my reporting, in my personal opinions, or when I've editorialized about this issue, I am pro-immigration for the most part. I think it's a fuel to our economy. I think our country is founded on immigration if it's done the right way. And I've never ever sort of tried to expose the hypocrisy that there is no threat. There is a threat, and I know the threat personally. It's not just the threat of terrorism, which is real, and there are, as you say, there are people who are trying to do harm to the United States. I'm not going to deny that as well. There's also a drug threat. There's also an organized crime threat. There's also a human trafficking threat. Yes. I know these personally because I've reported on the threat about a little less than 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago now. I got involved with the Mexican drug cartel because I wanted to see what it took to get across the border illegally, to pay cartel, to cross as a migrant. How much does it cost? How do you get across? How do they get you across? What is the underground system to get humans across the border? And I went on that journey, and I did. I met with cartel members, the people who will slice your throat, the same cartel heads that were just assassinated by the Mexican government with U.S. aid. These are real criminals. These are real threats. These are people who kill first. That's part of their business. And they have a very large enterprise south of the border in Mexico to get migrants across the border. It's almost impossible now to get across the border illegally without papers unless you go to a cartel. And you have to pay them, and they know the routes. They know the Border Patrol agents. They pay them off, or they'll get them through in a vehicle, under a fence, through a tunnel. There's a bunch of ways that they get them across, and it's expensive. I went on that journey. So I have reported on exactly what you're suggesting, that there is a criminal threat and a criminal element. And it's not just people that they get across. Most of the people that they get across are workers, people who have family members that they're trying to feed, and they're coming across and they're paying exorbitant amounts to cartel to get across the border so that they can find a job in the United States. The same routes that they use to get people across, they use to get drugs across. Sometimes they use the migrants themselves as mules to get their drugs across. So I know that whole story because I've been through it. I, as a matter of fact, was deposed by members of Congress, telling them where the routes are, telling them the cartel names, telling them exactly how they get it across. It's highly sophisticated, it's highly organized, and there is a battle between cartel and U.S. law enforcement, and who's going to win that sort of thin line along the border, and who's going to get their goods across, and who's going to stop them. So I am with you on that part. The part two of this is that we have not legalized a pathway for workers to come from Latin America in a way that's sane, sober, safe. We've asked them to come and work in our fields, but you're going to have to cross the desert. You're going to have to come illegally. You're going to have to pay a cartel head to get here. So I know Canada, it's a much smaller country. They don't have a big agricultural industry like we do, but they fly Mexican workers from small towns in Mexico to come and harvest the crops. They give them a plane ticket, they give them a visa, they work for 3 months in the fields, and when they're done with their 3 months of labor in Canada, they fly them back home.
Don't we have that program in place, though? Don't we have the H2?
Sort of, but most people don't want to use it because it's expensive, it's clunky.
Who doesn't want to use it? The farmers?
Rights. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
SBB says, yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier to have them there illegally and not give them any sort of overtime or workers' compensation or any rights.
And I know this. I've had an immigration lawyer on before, and she actually discussed that very same problems you just brought up, and it's very, very true. They're trying to circumvent the system, not pay proper wages. They don't want to house them. They don't want to feed. Like there's a commitment that they have so that they can be part of this program. And it's like instead of punishing the immigrant, why are they not punishing the farmer or the company that is doing this?
The company.
I never understood
They're
why
not
that
going
was.
after the heads of companies,
Yeah.
California is wealthy because of agriculture. It's the largest industry in the state.
Yes.
And 80% of the workforce is here illegally. There are undocumented workers for the most part who work in California fields. They're not going after the big ag companies. They're going after the little guy who's picking strawberries.
Right. So we're not. So the U.S. is not really taking care of the root of the problem. One, go after these heads of businesses. To be honest, they should have done that a long time ago. Hold them accountable. And here's the other thing, though. Like, how? I don't mean to offend, but like it's like we need to also try to work with Mexico or whoever to address the other root of the problem,
100%.
which is them needing to come to America for
Right.
a better wage, etc. And I think that's the other part of it that we don't talk about. Nobody talks
We
about that.
don't. U.S. policy is not about leveling the playing field. Why don't we have some kind of a trade balance? Why don't we try to level the playing field? Why don't we help Mexico's economy elevate? There wouldn't be the need for workers to come here if Mexico's economy was humming. So
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's a lot easier to say there's a bunch of illegals taking my job than
True.
it is to be nuanced and to work with other countries. It's a lot easier to scare people into voting for you, which is a lot of what the rhetoric is. It's just fear mongering, scapegoating, and it's about getting a vote. Nobody really wants to do the hard work.
No.
Democrat, Republican presidents and administrations alike. I think the problem that we have today at the border and with illegal immigration is all the administrations that have come before Trump. I don't blame it all on him. I blame everybody before him for not fixing the problem before him. He's just
it goes
taking
back a
advantage
ways.
of it.
Goes back a long ways. But
A long ways.
it's like if we circle back to what we were talking about earlier, though, it's like, okay, sure, the U.S. can help level the playing field, but Mexican government also wants to have to work with the U.S. But and I don't think we have that trust right now. That's the other issue.
Yeah.
And two, if we're not holding businesses accountable for circumventing the system, I mean, they're just going to keep doing what they do. If we take that away, I think that would help quite a bit with legal workers and, making sure that these businesses are also on a level playing field. So there's that too. It's like the U.S. government themselves is letting this happen as well by not enforcing the laws here when it comes to business and commerce. But at the same time, we can't just step in. And I'm not trying to be the arrogant American here. We can't just step in and fix Mexico because we have our own problems. But we should be able to work more as partners. I mean, damn, they're our neighbors right there in the South. It's like, why are we not? I know a lot of people from Mexico. It's like, I don't understand why we're not working more in a joint fashion instead of having this, like every day it just seems like they perpetuate the political theater of Mexico versus U.S. Mexico hates the U.S. U.S. hates Mexico. Like, what is all that? Like, why?
There's a lot of political grandstanding. I think it's a lot easier to have the system in place as it is. We can take advantage of people. There's high profit here. I've seen politicians lie, knowing full well that the solution here is some sort of a worker program, a visa system, a legalization program. They don't want it. They like the fight. They like to throw red meat at their voters. They like to scare people that you're being invaded, so you're going to vote for me. I've seen them do that on purpose. It's a political move more than it is about fixing the problem. It takes work. Nobody seems to want to do that work.
Yeah, I mean that's the key to politics. Keep people divided. Honestly,
That's right.
you keep us on our heels. We can't come together if we're always at each other's throats.
Right, and we can blame the people coming across the border. When I've seen corporations, I'm not kidding. During the harvest season, if there's not enough workers in a California field, that large agribusiness, that big corporate head will get a bus, will get a school bus. He'll go down to the border and he'll fill it with workers who don't have any papers. I have done that myself as a reporter. I have gotten on a job picking grapes with other undocumented workers. They never asked me for ID. They never asked me for my name. They never asked me for a social security number. They paid me in cash, no questions asked. I got to work on the day that I got onto the farm, and nobody asked me any questions. And that's how they do business, and they prefer to do business that way.
But
It's profitable.
that's also part of the problem.
It is the problem. I've always said if there were no jobs in the United States for an undocumented worker, we wouldn't need a border fence because nobody would come. The majority of the people, Border Patrol say 99% of the people who come to the United States without papers are looking for work. So if there wasn't a job, if there was a stopgap measure where you wouldn't be hired by any sort of company because you didn't have the right paperwork, you wouldn't come.
Yeah,
You wouldn't come.
exactly. Again, these businesses are circumventing the system. And if the agricultural business was monitored much more closely, I mean, we wouldn't have these low wage positions.
George, it's not monitored at all.
I know.
I mean, they're
I know
hands
that.
off.
I know.
They're not arresting these guys. This is a felony to hire an undocumented worker and pay them under the table without taxes. It's a felony, but they're not being charged.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Absolutely. Can you give us some more stories of encounters and people you've interviewed? Because I want like we've been talking about policy and border patrol, and we're talking about some of the root issues and causes here. But can you also give us some of the human side of this? From a migrant's perspective that you've encountered. Do you have anything that you can
Sure.
tell us?
That journey that I took across the border with the cartels approval, I documented the whole time that I went. I met in my, let me just step back a little bit. When you cross the border illegally, you have a coyote, a guide, who will take you across. This coyote has 2 cell phones and a walkie-talkie, and he is in constant communication with cartel members and also with a lookout on the U.S. side to see what Border Patrol activity looks like, so that when you cross the border, you're usually in the open. And you meet up with a small migrant group that this coyote will take across, usually a dozen people or less. It's easy to manage a dozen people or less. If the group gets any bigger, it gets a little unwieldy. I was in one of those groups. I was in one of those migrant groups, and I met a 17-year-old boy from central Mexico. He didn't even speak Spanish. He spoke a native indigenous tongue. He was a native Mexican Indian, and his mother, who lived in a rural part of Mexico, had no health care, and she was dying of cancer. And so he didn't know what to do. The only idea that he had in his mind was to get to the United States and find a job and send money back home. He called a couple of friends that he knew in the United States that worked at a Walmart, um, cleaning parking lots. Guys that get there at 5 o'clock in the morning and clean up the trash with leaf blowers and just clean up the parking lots. And they had a couple of accounts, and they said, we could get you a job. He was going to North Carolina from the Mexico border to work cleaning parking lots. And he had the job, and I met him. He was 17 years old, and he was going to cross the border illegally. He borrowed as much money as he could to pay the cartel to get him across. And he and I, for 5 days, tried to get across the US Mexico border into the Arizona desert. We walked day after day in 100+ degree heat. He never made it. He never made it. He died in the attempt. He became dehydrated. I lost contact with him, and I had heard that he had passed because he was trying to cross. To me, he is a hero. I mean, I get emotional when I talk about him because he was doing everything right. I know it's illegal to get into the United States without papers, but to him, he didn't have a choice to obey the law. He wanted to save his mother's life. And if he needed to cross that border illegally to get that minimum wage job at a parking lot in North Carolina of a Walmart, he was going to do it, come hell or high water, and he was going to risk his life. And by God, he did. So that story stays with me all the time. I think about him quite frequently, that he was sweet, kind, innocent, family man, no criminal nature as far as who he was as a human being. He just was desperate, and he was going to do anything he could to save his mother's life. So I don't know that if I were in his shoes, I would probably do the same thing.
But that's a sad story, but it also goes back to what we're saying. It's like why are people risking their life to that degree to, let's just be honest, what would be considered an entry level job, right? It's not a high paying job, but to him, it was worth his life to get over here to have that opportunity.
He would have made 10 times more a day working that Walmart job than he could have found in his village in Mexico. He was making about $3 a day, maybe a little bit more, $3 to $4 a day in his village in Mexico. That was not enough to pay his mother's medical bills.
It-
He was going to be making about $40 a day at that minimum wage job.
it's crazy because when you look at, I mean, like if you look at Mexico City, so modern, like so much going on, such a beautiful city. And you always hear about these towns, on the outskirts of Mexico or in these villages where it's just poor and they're
Yeah,
treated
the
so
majority of the
badly.
population in Mexico is below the poverty line. The majority, not 10%, not 20%, the majority of the population.
What in your
That's
mind
a
can
big.
for example, us as neighbors, what can we actually do to work with Mexico to help with that? Because
We
we
have
mentioned it, but
the
we didn't really get into like what can be done.
It's a very good question. We're a capitalistic society, so we want to pay the least amount for a tomato or produce or whatever
True.
comes from Mexico. So we're going to drive those prices down. We have the North American Free Trade Agreement with Mexico, so
Yes.
we can trade freely, but we can also bargain for low prices. So we pay Mexico wages to grow our produce, to manufacture our television sets, build cars for us, but we
Yep.
pay them Mexican wages. We keep them poor because it's to our benefit. We go to China and we do the same thing. It's cheaper to manufacture in China because the labor costs are lower. So there would have to be not a free trade agreement with Mexico if you wanted to elevate their economy. There would have to be a fair trade agreement where you would have to elevate the standard of living by paying just a bit more. I don't know if this is true. I've heard economically, if you were willing to pay an extra 10 cents for a head of lettuce, let's say it's $1, you are willing to pay $1.10, it would elevate wages enough for everybody to make a good living in Mexico. So it's not a lot, but we would have to pay a bit more for what we buy.
Yeah. And depending on what store you go to, it seems like you're paying way more than that for some reason, you
Today, we
know.
certainly are. You're right.
Well, I get your point though, and you're not wrong, but and part of that agreement is also Canada. So is Canada doing enough, for example? And then if we're not just talking Mexico, let's just talk about all the countries in the South. We have Guatemalans, we have so many other people, Honduras, El Salvador, like everybody also trying to get through Mexico to get through the U.S. border. So it's not just Mexicans, but it's like the whole South or South America it just seems like it's
Latin America is a disaster. The
yeah,
most of
it's
Latin
sad.
America is a disaster. There's another issue that we're not addressing a lot, and I've reported on recently, and at least in the last couple of years. Most of Latin America, or a large portion of Latin America, lives off the land. It's an agrarian agricultural society. They grow their own crops. They feed their livestock with it. They sell the extra for a little bit of money. That's pretty much the system. So when crops fail in a lot of Latin American countries, especially Central America right now, the economy falls apart. I mean, there's not a lot of foundation under it. There's not a lot of diversity in the economy. So when crops fail, the entire system fails. And right now, with climate change, especially in Central America, they're losing crops left and right. There are hurricanes upon hurricanes that they've never experienced before. There's flooding, there's drought, there's all kinds of systems that are really wreaking havoc on a system that relies on produce and relies. So when the crops fail, you see this big influx of people coming from Central America and South America to the United States because there's no way to make a living. There's no infrastructure. There's no government that will support them.
Right.
So they
It's
come
it's
here.
either it's either agriculture and the fishing industry. A lot of fishermen off the coastlines and whatnot,
Right?
and then also tourism. And those are the only things. And if you can't have any of those working together, then I mean, all their economy is based on just those three things, really,
It's
mostly.
hanging on by a thread. You're absolutely right. And when it fails, there's hundreds of thousands of people without work. And what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Oh, the U.S. is a wealthy country. I'm going to give that a try.
I want to go
I
back
have
to the
talked to those people.
yeah. Sorry, John. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right.
I want to go back to what you touched on when you were talking about that. Yes, there's a drug problem and things like that as well. So the Mexican cartels have, and I know you did some, actual investigation on this, but the Mexican cartels have become more emboldened and more dangerous. And it kind of goes back to what we're talking about in terms of a terrorist threat. They're classified as terrorist organizations. By all means, everything that they do is literally falls under being a terrorist. But people just talk about this is how big they are. Okay. People just talk about what's going on between the Mexican cartels and the USA in terms of the drug trade. A lot of people aren't talking about the 300 tons of cocaine that is confiscated in Europe that comes from Mexico as well. You know, they're a global organization. They're working in the Middle East now. They're sending their paramilitary, right? People to war zones to get trained. You know, there was some that went over to Ukraine to get training. And so it's like we can't treat these Mexican cartels as just something that is local to Mexico anymore. I mean, they are a world problem. And so with everything that just happened, like when they just took out, was it El Mencho, I believe was his name? When they just
That's
took
right.
him out, and then the retaliation that happened in Mexico. And what I found interesting is if you look at, if you believe social media, number one, but it seems like a lot of people were saying, nope, everything's fine in Mexico. There's nothing going on. There's no explosions, no attacks, no retaliation. And do you know if that's true? Do you have a different take on that?
The only thing I could compare it to, and having done reporting on Mexican drug cartels for a chunk of my career, and also the Colombian cartels when there was a war on drugs during the Bush years,
Yes.
um, it's it's basically the way they communicate is through threat, through terror, through burning of buildings, through burning of cars, through assassinations, mutilating bodies. It becomes their calling card. So if they go ahead and they knock off a kingpin, the head of one of the largest drug cartels in Mexico, which just happened a few days ago, they're going to retaliate in kind. They're not going to retaliate any other way. They want you to know how big they are, how threatening they are, how dangerous they are.
Right.
So sometimes when I see those things happen, I almost think it's probably the wrong approach, because all you're going to do is escalate. All you're going to do is embolden them. You're going to deepen their hatred. You're going to deepen their retaliation. I think Mexico has become an unsafe place overnight. Mexican cartels are entrenched in government in Mexico. Mexican government is a corrupt system. It is not necessarily run by the cartels, but there are heads of state in Mexico that are cartel members. The police forces in Mexico are cartel. So you have to be very careful where you poke the bear, because they're going to roar. So I don't know that killing the kingpin, although it's a feather in Trump's cap because he kind of took ownership of that in his State of the Union address, that he had a hand in it. But I think it comes with a big cost to civil society. I would be afraid to be in Mexico right now. One
But
of
the
the
U.S.
things that we don't address is the drug use in the United States. We're the
Oh,
largest consumers of illegal narcotics
sure,
in the
sure. We
world.
we we can talk
There's a
about that.
market here.
We can talk
There's a
about that.
market.
Sure.
Yeah,
But let's go back to what you said about Trump taking feather in his cap, State of the Union. Realistically, all we did was help in supplying intelligence. We didn't
that's right.
go out
And
there and
money.
put boots on the ground. I mean, it was
Yeah,
important intelligence, but Mexican government actually took care of things. So I
right.
don't want to take away from that, but also let's also discuss, like you say, the cartels don't run the government officially, but the cartels have been a problem since the late 70s. I mean, this has been an ongoing thing since the
This
late
is, George,
70s.
what happens when you have a failed government. Somebody steps in the power vacuum. And if it's not the cartels, it'll be the gangs.
Of
In El
course.
Salvador, for the longest time, gangs ran the show. They were the government. Gangs fixed pipes and roofs and roads and built baseball parks in addition to extorting people and assassinating people. So it is a need that is filled by a void of a failed government that isn't bent on law enforcement, that is corrupt. I don't know where you could go in Mexico and not pay off a cop to get out of a ticket, to not be arrested. I've done most of my business in Latin America by bribes. I'm not proud of saying that, but I've paid off officials to let me go and let me do my work. And it's a corrupt system. So corruption breeds corruption. We have hopefully still a rule of law in the United States. I'm not saying it's not corrupt, but probably not as corrupt,
Right. Oh, there is corruption. We know that.
of course.
Okay, so let's talk about the drugs. You were just saying that there is a market, a demand, and it's driven by the people in the United States, right? So
It's the largest market. I don't want to say that they're the cause of it all, but I don't know, go to any corner in my city, I can score just about anything I want. I can get you some pot. I can get you some coke.
Right.
You want pills? You want meth? What do you want? I can call up a dealer. It's not hard. It's not hard to find drugs in the United States.
It isn't. Okay, so cocaine was introduced when in the United States, roughly around early 80s, somewhere around there.
I would imagine. I'm not quite sure, but that sounds
Uh,
about right.
I believe that's when it was, late 70s, early 80s. It was introduced. So there's two things we can say about this. Okay. Yes, people in US are too damn addicted on stuff. They need to just stop. I mean, let's just be honest. But we also can't ignore that the market has been created and fueled and pushed and expanded by those who are supplying. So it's a two-way street, unfortunately. Um,
You're
but
absolutely right.
let's not just talk about the US. Let's talk about how, what happened in Venezuela and everything that came out about that. Now, I can go into all the geopolitical stuff about Venezuela and Iran and China and their involvement and everything that happened going on with Peru, you name it. I can do that if you want. I have a lot of knowledge on that. But we also can talk about how they were literally shipping 250 metric tons of cocaine only, not all drugs, just the cocaine side of it, to Europe. Okay. Only 25% of that went to the US. We're also actually, I just mentioned there was 300 tons of cocaine that was being stopped. This isn't everything that went through, but being stopped in Europe coming from the Mexican cartels. So the drug demand is very global, and Asia is now becoming the market. The Mexican cartels right now are literally trying to get into Asia because it's such a bigger demand. In fact, cocaine goes for twice the price than they can
Wow.
get here. So there's a demand everywhere. And if you're talking about countries that do it legally, like, okay, let's talk about Portugal. It's legal, right? Anyone, you can do drugs. You can't say there still isn't a black market there because even though they legalized, for example, marijuana or weed in many states here, there's still a black market in those areas because those legalized drugs are expensive. So it's like, is it a U.S. problem? Is it because people are addicted, or we just have a human problem where people just like they cannot shake being addicted to drugs because they take them to a place other than where their lives are? It's like what came first, chicken or egg, right? Cart before the horse. I mean, I'm not sure we know how
I
to
think,
fix this.
George, if you don't deal with it holistically, all you're doing is kind of trying to chop the head of Medusa. She's just going to grow two more heads.
Yeah, good, yeah.
You're just going to kill the kingpin, but you're not going to deal with the
True.
demand,
I
or you're
believe
not going to
that.
deal with the corruption. You're just exacerbating the problem. It has to be a holistic approach. It has to be an all-encompassing approach if you really want to deal with this issue.
Yeah, but making it illegal doesn't work. Making it legal doesn't work. And then you have the legal drug trade. We're talking about the opioid epidemic in the '90s, et cetera, and it's still going on. So it's like it's all a big mess. And when I talked to one of my DEA friends, he said that he believes that the drug trade, the way it exploded and how the cartels got so big. I mean, we can talk about other things. A lot of it came right off the coattails of the opioid epidemic because people became more addicted to a
Of course.
substance, and then they started chasing other means and methods to keep chasing that high. So if
I
we want
think
to
it's
blame
on
anybody,
purpose.
let's blame the drug manufacturer. That's where it started.
Of course, I think if I want to have a good client or a regular customer, I'm going to make sure they're addicted to this stuff. I'm going to manufacture it in a way that I have a customer for life. That's on purpose.
All right. We're not going to solve
Well,
the
now
world's
that we're
problems.
depressed,
We're not going to solve
I
the
need
world's
that bottle of
problems.
champagne that's sitting behind you.
Right? I mean, I was gonna have a beer, but I'm on the coffee right now. But yeah, I hear you. Hey, listen, I kind of got away a little bit of why you were here, but I appreciate this conversation because I want your perspective. You have done the work. You investigated these things. So I did want to hear what you had to say on it. I kind of want to hear. Let's talk about your podcast too. Okay, you've done some documentaries. You also have the podcast, The Raid. I've heard a few episodes where you're actually, shedding light on migrants who went through getting deported or dealing with what you said earlier about being targeted just for being brown, et cetera. And also, you talk to people that can explain the legal aspects of the situation. Can you tell everybody about your work there and maybe some stories or encounters from that podcast that really stuck with you?
I have found that doing a podcast, probably like you have too, gives me a lot of freedom. I have worked in mostly national television for most of my career, and it's for shit. National broadcast news today is for shit on all sides. It is salacious. They want only the headlines. They don't inform the public in a way that's necessary, that you and I can come away from a news report feeling like we've learned something. It's all about tit for tat, headlines, grab attention, all of that kind of stuff. It's all to attract advertisers and to attract viewers. And the audience is left basically just hating each other and shouting at the television set because they hate America or they hate their government or whatever it is. It's just to get people kind of emotionally involved. So I've stopped trying to pitch my stories to the broadcast outlets, which was my entire career for a long time. So the podcast is born out of that. I'd rather have somebody sit down like you are right now, somebody who knows what they're talking about, whether it's an immigration lawyer, whether it's somebody who's being detained, somebody who works at a detention facility, a politician who might be trying to pass legislation. Everybody who's involved in this big immigration mess, I put them on the podcast and I let them speak and I let them have their platform, whether you believe them or not, whether you think they're full of shit. I get those comments all the time. I'm a liar. I'm a bot. That's okay. You can do that. I know what I'm doing. Some of the people who stood out to me the most, for example, there was a young man who was in Oxnard, California, which is a big agricultural community, was going to work in his truck. There was an immigration raid right where his work was, and he had no idea what was happening. This is when the raids were starting in California in the summer, in June. And he's a brown skinned guy, and he got pulled into this whole mess. And he got his windshield smashed in, his driver's side window smashed in. He got pepper sprayed. He was tear gassed. He was pulled out of his vehicle. He was arrested. He was handcuffed. He had and I've seen the photos, he had 8 U.S. Border Patrol agents on his back, one on his neck. He could barely breathe. And he was detained for 3 days. He's an Iraqi war vet. He's a U.S. citizen. He told the guys every single minute he could have a breath that he was a U.S. citizen. He didn't look like one. He didn't, quote, look like one.
Yeah, didn't fit the profile. Right?
He got involved with the whole group of farm workers that they were arresting at the time, and the Border Patrol agents wouldn't take his word for it. While he was arrested and detained, he was not allowed to call a lawyer. He was not allowed to call his family. It was his daughter's 3rd birthday. He was going to go after work to buy her gift. He didn't get to celebrate her 3rd birthday. So, he had a platform. He's actually testifying in Congress a few times to try and change the way that ICE does business. But those are the kinds of people that we're looking for on the podcast.
That's good. And you're presenting people's perspectives who actually went through these situations. So,
Absolutely.
And like you said, like I'm just gonna put it out there, whether people believe it or not, as I told you when we were putting this together and we're discussing earlier, I I think we need to have these conversations. We need to hear these stories. And honestly, I'll say it again. I am so tired of the echo chamber phenomenon. It's ridiculous, and especially prevalent in podcasting and well, social media. So
Well, it drives viewership or listenership. I mean, they want to stimulate the algorithm. They want to get people upset. But you know what?
right.
Our country's fallen apart here. If you don't have real informed citizenry, it's really hard to vote for someone that you know whether or not you're voting for the right person. It's really hard to make business decisions. It's really hard to love your neighbor if you think they're out to get you. So, this misinformation and disinformation and sleight of hand is crap. I'm really sick of it as a journalist. I got into this business to inform people, period. I'm not trying to give them a slant. I'm trying to give them a perspective that they may not know because I'm the person on the ground. And they don't have to go there. I'm the person that's going to share those kinds of stories, and then they can make up their minds. It's not up to me what they do with the information.
Yeah, but
It's
but
just my job to give it. Yeah,
just in talking to you, it sounds like you take journalism, you take pride in it, and you come at it with integrity, where we don't see that too often. To be
it's
quite
part of
honest,
democracy. The very First Amendment is freedom of the press. I
right?
mean, the founders of our country knew very well that politicians and people in high positions of power and wealthy people are going to try and get away with things. So you need a media that is a watchdog and is the fourth rail and holds people to account. That whole system has been shot.
What about the division you see though, and like where it's become so polarized politically in media? Because I mean, you've been in media and journalism for so long. Have you seen it shift in a
100%.
yeah, okay. So it's worse than it ever was in your opinion? Because I kind of think it
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. I have no doubt because I've been in it and it's the reason that I've left it. I made a nice living being on television and working in broadcast news. So I don't want it anymore because I know in order for me to tell a story today, it's not about whether or not it's credible or that the public needs to know about it or that it's important information. It's whether or not it's going to sell advertising.
Right, right. No, that's exactly what it is.
So it didn't matter. I had a very hard time telling stories about the border because, for the most part, it's about Spanish speakers. It's not. It's really important information that we need to know about border security. But if it features a brown person, I don't know if we want it on the air because I don't know if I can sell. Can't sell advertising to car companies or whatever it might be.
You feel it's still
Um,
it's that way still, even now?
of course, it's worse. It's worse. There's competition for advertising. It's the media outlets have conglomerated. There are fewer and fewer independent stations that can do really good work. They've all kind of joined together, and they're mighty. They're all buying each other up. There's a merger deal going on right now for Netflix to acquire Warner Brothers and CNN. What the hell does Warner Brothers have to do with CNN?
Nothing.
Um, they're going to impose their entertainment values on CNN to be more flashy, to be prettier, to be sexier, whatever it is, and news is going to go out the window. I
Do
mean,
you think
CNN. I call CNN Children's News Network, so it's already bad. You know,
so? Do you think there is more value in people who are considered more center these days? It's like the Democrat Party of old, to be honest. I'm just going to say this: the Democrat Party today is not what they used to be. Because I used to be a Democrat. A lot of my people from a lot of us Gen Xers used to be Democrats, and then we look back at the party and what it's become now. We're like, I don't know where it's going. I'm not bashing them just to bash them. If you are a Democrat, whatever. I'm just saying that we see that party go one way. And now let's just be honest. Conservatives are in power and they're starting to do everything they said that they didn't like. They're going the opposite direction. So it's like how do we decipher and get through all the bullshit that's being thrown at us in the media today, in your opinion, from someone who's on the other side of it? How do we decipher the bullshit? How do we cut through the middle of it all and realize these guys are just playing team sports and they really don't care about us?
they are playing team sports. It's the best description I've heard of it. They are playing the game. Doesn't matter if you have an R next to your name or a D next to your name. You're trying to raise millions of dollars for your campaign, and you're kissing this baby and that baby, and you're playing the game. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to deliver all the Epstein files except the ones that I'm in.
Oh,
So it's the same
yeah.
on both sides. It's the same on both sides. I'm not really for any politician or any political slant. I'm for the facts. I'm for the truth. And if you're a truth teller and if you're a fact teller, I'm on your side. As far as the public is concerned, I don't know how you're going to discern who is telling the truth and who is spreading lies or rhetoric. I am a big fan of citizen journalists. I love people with their cell phone cameras who are out there, who are documenting, who are sharing information that looks real because they've recorded it on their phones. Podcasters, I think, are the new news organizations. I love you and the stories that you carry. Whether I agree with them or not is not news. You don't have to agree or disagree with facts. You're just supposed to take them like your vegetables. It's just information. So it's not about whether I hate liberals or whether I hate conservatives. That's not news.
No,
That's
it's not.
just propaganda and rhetoric. And I do believe that people are trying to uh, you know, fuel those disagreements between us, and the truth and the facts get lost in the middle. So I'm trying really hard to just give you information. I
Yeah,
get pinned as a left-leaning, immigrant-loving liberal. Fine, you can categorize me any way that you want, but I know my facts are sound.
I hear you. I have a few things to say on that, and it's nothing. It reinforces what you said. I have always said people live on the surface of information. Literally, they never go past the headline. They don't dive any deeper, and I think that's part of the problem that we have. People keep their heads down. they're buried, they're busy, they're taking their kids to soccer, whatever it is, and they're like, "Oh, that's what happened. Okay, that's what I'm believing, and I don't need to hear anything else." They don't have time for it. They don't want to have time for it. Don't make it. It's
Yeah,
it's as if they don't care themselves because they don't realize the implications of what is happening around them and how it affects them. You know,
right.
and then, the other you say, you've been, labeled or, pigeonholed into be called, a leftist, whatever. Well, I get the same thing. I'll be honest with you. I'm the hardcore MAGA guy, whatever, but, it's like the problem is we only get these things because they don't conversate. They don't sit across from each other. Well, in this case, Zoom, because we're not in front of each other. But they don't want to do this because they don't want to be offended. They don't want to be challenged, and I think that's bullshit. And again, you don't have to agree with everything. I don't have to agree with everything you say either. But at the same time, I think we could both come away with this learning something and maybe seeing something from a different perspective. I'm not trying to
Hopefully,
change your core being, but at least we're having a conversation to where we can say, "Hey, I never thought of that," or "Wow, I didn't know that story. Maybe I'm looking at this wrong." And that's what's important to me. Not what team you support, right, left, blue,
I
red. Who
love
gives
I
a shit?
love hearing you say that. I don't find that on broadcast news. I find people in their corners shouting at each other, and that's now what is the substitute for news. I can't tolerate it. I just can't
Well,
tolerate it.
and you know what, John? That's why I like having these conversations. I know everybody. Like, I get a lot of emails, people saying, "Interview this person, interview that person," and I'm not that. I'm nothing compared to your career at all. Believe me, and I understand that. So I appreciate you being here. But what I'm trying to get at is, I don't like interviews. I like having conversations like this because we get to know who you are and we get to actually get to some of the questions that most people would never ask. So I hope more people would do that or do what we're doing. The whole 15-minute, okay, tell me about yourself, where you're not getting down to the bottom of the thing. You're just scratching the surface. I mean, it's just so played out, and I just hope that stuff goes away and people actually have conversations again. I really do. Do you want to add
I'm
anything
hoping
else
that
to
we
that?
do. I'm enjoying this conversation. I never thought of myself as wanting to be in the podcast world. But for me, it's the only place that seems to be giving good information, or people who have platforms on social media I listen to as well. I kind of get my media from a large group of people. And sometimes I think I just call, well, that doesn't sound factual. I might check myself. I
Right.
always put my resources and where I'm coming from whenever I post something on social media or on the podcast. I let people go read the newspaper article themselves or the document that I'm referring to. So, um, there is a lot of misinformation and a lot of crap out there. I'm not hopeful that we all are getting the right kind of information. But you're right. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's not hate each other before we even get to know each other. You
Right.
know,
I agree with you. Of the documentaries you've done, what is the one you would tell people to watch?
there's one out right now which is kind of about what we're talking about. I did a documentary for HBO a couple of years ago. It sat on the shelf for a couple of years. It reveals a cover up of a murder of an undocumented immigrant at the hands of Border Patrol. Border Patrol brutalized this guy. They beat him up so badly that he died from his injuries. And then there was a cover up. They lied about what had happened. They tainted evidence. They planted blood evidence. They lied on official reports. And I investigated the Border Patrol's cover up as well as what happened to this individual. He wasn't supposed to be in the country. He came across illegally, but he didn't deserve to be beaten to death, which is what happened to him. And HBO decided to do a documentary based on my reporting. The documentary is about this particular case, and HBO was afraid to release it. HBO sat on it for over a year. And I pounded the table and said, this is information that people need to know. People need to know about what their government is doing and not doing. They need to know about corrupt cops. Whether it's good or bad, we need to know who's a bad cop. And that's what the documentary did. And they sat on it for over a year. And then they tried to release it on December 29th, which was a Monday, which nobody's watching documentaries. They tried to bury it because
Right.
they didn't want to piss off the administration, and they didn't want the administration at the same time to ruin their merger deal. So just like I'm telling you, it's all
Okay.
about business. It's all about making sure that the money changes hands in the right way. It's all about 80 plus billion-dollar mergers, which is what the merger is valued at. and they try to let it go under the radar. So I went to the LA Times and we did a big expose on HBO trying to bury the documentary. Anyway, the documentary is sound. It shows how Border Patrol needs to be reined in. There is no oversight. They can kill someone like Alex Preddy and cover it up and pretend nothing bad happened here. And that's what the documentary is about. It's about how the US Border Patrol manages its own. It's about how they're trained and how they go out into the country and do what they do. It's really relevant to what's happening today. It's called Critical Incident. So it's on your HBO feed right now.
Critical Incident. Why don't you tell everybody else out there where they can follow more of your work? I know you have a website. If you want to tell people about the website, obviously, and your
Sure, just
podcast.
mostly the podcast. I mean, we're
Okay.
doing 3 episodes a week. So the raid, just like the immigration raids, the podcast is called The Raid, and it's at theraidpodcast.org is our website, and anywhere that you get your podcasts, you can find The Raid. And we're talking to everybody. We're talking to everybody who has a hand in what's going on with the immigration raids across the country.
Awesome. If you don't mind, John, I'm going to wrap this up.
Great.
I actually enjoy talking to you. I just,
Likewise.
you got to call it somewhere, right? You got to end it sometime. But no, hey, I appreciate you. Really do. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. I do. I'd like to stay in touch with you, and if anything else pops up, I will be in touch, and hopefully you feel you can do the same with me.
Absolutely. I am so respectful of your work and what you're doing. And as a fellow podcaster, now that I'm in that space, I tip my hat to you. Thank you so much for your time.
You're just being nice.
No, I've enjoyed it. I can't even believe that we've been talking as long as we have. The time has gone by.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, John. All right. You have a great day. I'm going to sign off now, and I encourage everybody to definitely listen to The Raid. I've listened to a few episodes myself, and I'm going to check out that documentary for sure. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Devils hide behind redemption. Honesty is a one-way gate to hell.